Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take to kick off your week. We've just had hours and hours of talks in Switzerland. The Americans, the Iranians, high-level delegations facilitated by Qatar and Pakistan, and there is indeed some progress. Pretty interesting in the sense that a lot of chippy back and forth around this memorandum of understanding. The agreement is to end the war and to reopen the strait. And everything else is now a matter of ongoing negotiation. Very hard to characterize that as a win for the Americans, because at least as of now, none of the major war goals that the Americans had at the beginning of this fight, nor the Israelis for that matter, have been achieved. And there was recently, just in the last couple of days, a survey done by Hebrew University of Israeli citizens, some 92% of which believe that the Iranians have won the war, and that the Israelis, and by extension the Americans, have lost. Look, I mean, Israel obviously spending a lot more time thinking about this. It's a much bigger issue for them. They've wanted to engage in these strikes for a long time, and the end of the war determined by the Americans, not by the Israelis, with a lot of U.S. pressure to stop the fighting in Lebanon, is going to affect the Israelis a lot more, and it's going to affect Netanyahu a lot more with upcoming elections in October. But still, that's an important data point. My view is that on the one hand, Iran is in a stronger geopolitical position today than they were before the war. And so in that regard, you can say that they're winning. Though it's hard to categorize a country that has had their supreme leader assassinated, much of their military leadership assassinated, much of their military and economic core infrastructure blown up. Hard to say that they have won in a meaningful way. Yes, they're getting paid off now. Yes, they have leverage over the strait. But I wouldn't want to be in their position in terms of domestic politics over the medium term, given how much economic and military challenge they're going to have. And also, when you use leverage like they have over the strait, you use it once, and the next time it's diminished. And here, the relevant analogy, I think, is China. And what's happened to the United States is very much like what happened with the Chinese. I mean, Trump's two big losses in foreign policy of this administration have been China and Iran. And in both cases, they're very similar paths to what happened. Trump sees the Chinese as an adversary with a weaker economy than the United States has, not growing very much, big structural problems, smaller overall than the US economy. He hits them hard, essentially with tariffs that are so high that it's a boycott in reality, and expects that the Chinese are going to capitulate. They're going to surrender, that Xi Jinping is going to call them up and is going to end up with a trade deal that will give the Americans a much stronger position than they had under Biden or the first Trump term, because they now see a strong American leader that's resolute and is going to hit them hard. It's not what happened. Chinese stood up to the Americans, hit back as hard as they took, much more politically and economically patient in taking that pain, surprising the United States, which was unwilling to accept economic catastrophe. And then eventually Trump backs down. And when he backs down, he ends up treating the Chinese much more cautiously, much more carefully, and is very unwilling to get involved in another fight because he understands the consequences. It's exactly what happened with Iran. Trump hits Iran hard together with the Israelis, assassinates the leadership, and takes on their military capabilities and assumes that they're going to cave. They're going to give America everything the U.S. wants on the nuclear file. And in fact, that they're going to have leaders in place that'll be much more willing to engage with the Americans on other issues too, like the future of their economy and their diplomatic orientation in the region. None of that happens. The Iranians use their leverage. They squeeze the Strait of Hormuz. They disrupt it, kind of like the Chinese with the critical minerals and rare earths, and force the Americans to back down, lest there be an economic catastrophe, as Trump recently admitted there would be if he kept at the war and the blockade for just a few more weeks. And he didn't want that. He doesn't want to be President Hoover, not with the Chinese, not with the Iranians, so he backs down. And going forward, the reality is that Trump is going to treat the Iranians with more caution and is going to be very, very wary about starting another fight with the Islamic Republic, even though he hasn't achieved his goals. Now, that's the downside. On the other side, once the Chinese use their critical minerals, which they had built up for decades, suddenly the US and everyone else in the world goes, oh my God, that's a danger. We can't let them do that to us again. They can't squeeze us off. And so they start investing in the rare earths and the exploitation and the supply chain and the processing in a way that they haven't for decades. And it will take time, but within a few years, China's pricing power, their political leverage with these rare earths will be a fraction of what it was when they put that loaded gun on the table and backed the Americans down. That's exactly what's going to happen with the Strait of Hormuz. You've got UAE leaving OPEC. You've got additional pipelines being built. You've got more infrastructure being built. And you have countries around the world that are saying we cannot be this vulnerable to the strait being closed again. So we have to invest much more in alternatives to that transit and alternatives to that energy. And that means that Iran's pricing power, which seems very high today, is going to be very diminished over the coming years. And so do they end up being a winner by using the leverage that they had but didn't want to have to ever use? And the answer is long-term, no. Long-term, it undermines everyone. So the Americans certainly haven't won here, and Trump certainly hasn't won because he's seen to be much weaker against an adversary that's capable and willing of hitting him back. But that doesn't mean that the Chinese and the Iranians long-term are victorious. And I think we have to be, it's not as exciting a story, it's more nuanced, it doesn't blare at you as a headline, but it is the way I think we should consider how the geopolitics and the power over time are changing in this G0 world. That's it for me. I'll talk to you all real soon.